We're talking all fade list busts and risk players as we lead up to the NFL season. That's right. It's the Fantasy Football Almanac Show. You're listening to Sean and David as usual. David, how you doing, my friend?
Excellent, man. Good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning. So last week, I know we have a couple of things to knock off the list. We are going to be talking about fantasy football busts, risk players, and all that. We have some news this morning. Obviously, Leonard Fernett got canned, basically, which is funny because, by the way, David, if you haven't picked up a fantasy football guide yet from Amazon, you're looking for it, you can still get in on it. I'm still keeping everything up to date. Last updates were sent out on like August 28th, so obviously it's the most up to date. It's the most up to date publication as well. But I was looking through the risk players, David, and let me see if I can find this one. I don't know if YouTube, if this is, the camera's going to pick it up here, but if you can read that name right there, we got Leonard Fernett on the risk players list. Now, I thought, speaking candidly, I thought he was going to make it through the season. And then, the Jags are going to part ways. The Jags are just always perpetually trying to get rid of him for some reason. He must be a pain in the ass to deal with in the locker room or something because he's basically been their entire offense. Outside of last year with Gardner Minshew and DJ Chark, he's been their entire offense since he got drafted there. But he's gone. People asking me, what do I think? I've been higher on Chris Thompson since he went there. If you follow Gruden's scheme, they made it through the draft. They didn't get a third down back. So I always thought Chris Thompson would have a little bit more sleeper value. I guess it's Raquel Armstead. I mean, what are you thinking at this point?
It's really, I'm thinking a lot of things. Number one is what was their motive? Because like you said, it's got to be something in the locker room, off the field. Fournette's definitely, there can be an argument made he's an overrated player, but
Sure.
Compared to the other Jacksonville running backs on the roster,
Yeah.
he was clearly their best guy. So there's something going on where they just don't want his presence around, I think.
Right.
As far as who's the guy to benefit, I feel like this is kind of like a trap. Like everybody's going to we just want an opportunity to be
Right.
made into something always. Right. And people are going to be rushing out to get, like you said, Raquel Armstead, Chris Thompson. I think another guy who, if I was going to take a flyer, maybe I'd look at James Robinson, who was, I believe, an undrafted running back who has a plus athletic profile, had a really good pro day, I believe. But I think it's really with all three of these guys, you add them to your roster, it's not good because if Chris Thompson does all right, Raquel Thompson does all right, you're not going to want to drop them. But you're also probably not going to ever feel comfortable with them in your starting lineup.
Right.
And it's just kind of going to prevent you from picking up other players who could actually make a difference from you.
So I think
I don't like it.
I agree. I mean, what the guide does primarily is it dissects offensive philosophy and all that stuff. So I look at Gruden's his history as a play caller. You're probably looking at like a three-headed monster at running back, in my opinion, which is things I try to stay away from. That's why I'm historically lower on Miles Sanders than everybody else, because Peterson, he'll try to go four deep at running back. So like
I really hope he doesn't. So they don't sign Fournette in Philly, man.
Yeah. You know what? And that's exactly the type of thing that would happen. It would screw everybody over, right? That's what happened. Kansas City, that happened last year. Like I was high on Damian Williams. He pulls his hammy in camp. LaShawn McCoy gets waived in Buffalo. He pops back over, and it murks up that whole backfield. And then like Fournette, that's like the perfect landing spot. I'm not saying for fantasy owners, I'm not saying for the Eagles, but I'm saying like that just makes sense because that's something the Eagles would do. I mean, it's just. But anyway, yeah, I agree. Like Chris Thompson to me is like if big if here, as big of an if not more than Dalvin Cook. If he's healthy and you're in a PPR league, he could give you some juice. If you're heavy on bye weeks and games are maybe being postponed for COVID, I wouldn't say he's somebody would want to back your roster up on. But I really think this is a three-headed monster. My advice is to stay away. I think yours is as well, if I'm hearing you correctly. Yeah. So I want to tell you a little bit about my dynasty draft, year one dynasty draft that I had following the recording on our show. And by the way, just a reminder for our listeners here, a couple things. One, it's still a new podcast, everybody. If you could like, subscribe, give us a comment. That's huge for us as we develop. So if you could just take that 10, 15 seconds, just scroll down if you're on your iPhone or something like that. Scroll down, give us a 5-star, and just say, hey, great show. Write it in. That really makes a big impact for us, so we'd appreciate it. But we are next week, David. We're going to be talking about week one projections and, players to have in your lineup and matchups. That's where we're going to be at next week. I mean, it's imminent, which is a fantastic
Hopefully
thing.
Fournette's on a team by next week. So I'm
sure he will be. I'm sure he will be, but what a mess. What a mess. Why don't you tell me, hey, you know what? I forgot. What were we talking about before the show? You're just talking about, leagues and rosters. Maybe I was going to talk about my Dynasty League. Can you remember? I was like, yeah, let's talk about that when we open up the show. Banter. I can't remember anymore.
I was telling you about just kind of some commissioner drama I had to deal with.
It's always something when you...
Which reminds you, if you're going to be a commissioner, prepare yourselves because nobody... It's never going to be perfect. Someone's always going to be upset with whatever you do, no matter if it's nothing to be upset about. You're not going to be able to please everyone. So just prepare yourself for the commissioner role.
Yeah. So my all-time favorite league, I think we've talked about on this show before, but it was a deep keeper, keep 10, 20-person roster, so deeper rosters, but we had IDP as well. And we did all of our this was back before really like ESPN and Yahoo and NFL got super sophisticated with their rule complexities and you can make scoring changes. It was before that. So we did a lot of our stuff bespoke, like basically customized offline and we did some, IR. It was before IR slots even existed, all that stuff. And that league faded because the commish was just like overworked. He's just like, I don't want to do it. If anybody else wants to take commish responsibilities, he can. And I was just like, I don't want to do it. So the league faded out. But now everybody was just kind of interested. It's been about 5 years. So we had a year one dynasty. And we talked, I think last week we talked about this. And I had traded back from the 4th pick to the 8th pick because I wanted to be on the swing. Hey, David, by the way, for our YouTube crowd, your camera's blurred right now. Could you just stick your thumb over the camera and see if it readjusts for you?
You want to see my pretty face?
Yeah, we need to see it. We need to see it.
How's that?
There we go. We're back.
What are you saying about my face? Huh?
Yeah. We need to see it. We see it in the comments. We see it in the YouTube comments. They said we need more David face. Yeah. So I'm in the year one. I won't go through the thing because we did a special edition on Get Paid last week, and we kind of ran through the dynasty draft and what it looks like. But I traded back from 4 to 8 because I wanted the swing, and I was hoping. I knew there were 2 Browns fans, so I knew I wasn't going to get Chubb on the swing like he's going on all the leagues, and I love Chubb. And sure enough, he ended up getting picked like 5th or 6th or something. So I traded back. And I don't think that's, by the way, I don't think that's too high for Chubb the player, but it's a lot higher than he's going in fantasy draft. So in a typical league, you probably would have had him on the swing back. But anyway, I was really hoping I'd get Josh Jacobs and maybe like Aaron Jones or something like that. Maybe like a guy like CEH would fall, although I have some questions. But anyway, what ended up happening is there was a run on quarterbacks due to our scoring rules. And so Zeke ends up falling to me at 8. At 8! And I was like, okay, because I honestly would have taken him at 4. And so I was like, okay, well, now I'm playing with house money. And then it gets back to the swing. So we have a 10-man league. I have the 13 after all that. And freaking Derrick Henry goes 1 pick before me. It goes at 12. I almost ended up with Zeke and Henry and the swing, but I ended up with Zeke and Aaron Jones, which I was just fine with. And then I had Eckler fall to me in the 3rd round, dude. So my first 3 picks were Zeke, Aaron Jones, and Eckler. And then I almost got Miles Sanders in the 4th round.
Robust RB.
I know, man. So like that was the theme of that draft is all these RBs kept falling to me. So I'm like, I have like 8 starting running backs. I need to make a trade because like I just kept passing up quarterback. I'm happy with every other position.
Let me chime in on that real quick too because I had my work league redraft league last night.
Yeah.
And I think now that we're starting to get closer to the season, you can kind of throw out the mocks a little bit because it seemed like that top 4 was set in stone on everybody's board. And then you talk about Zeke falling. This is a redraft league last night. We had McCaffrey number 1. Zeke went number 2. Saquon went 3.
Mm-hmm.
Derrick Henry went 4.
Yep.
Dalvin Cook went 5. And Alvin Kamara fell all the way to 6.
Yep.
So I had the option of picking 6. We determined our order by a NASCAR race, and my driver finished 6th. And I'm like, I don't want 6th. Like, I'll miss out on the top 4. I might not get Henry. Like, put me to 10th. And then I saw last night, I'm like, oh, man, if I knew Kamara was going to fall to 6th, I might have second-guessed that.
I know.
Started running back tight end instead of running back. But
yeah, in retrospect, it does. And in retrospect, I ended up with like David Johnson late, which I'm a little bit high. Like he's not a sexy pick, but he's a guy that's going to get volume. So you're talking about like he's not in my starting lineup. he's like one of my flexes coming off, and that's not bad value for a flex. So in retrospect, I would have passed up on him and taken one of the better tight ends, but I like Hayden Hurst. You know that. We talked about that. I got him late. The real one I missed out on was Stafford. I ended up risking and taking like another wide receiver. I missed out on Stafford. So I ended up walking into the season with like nothing at quarterback. But it's a dynasty league. I'm set up for years, and I'll be able to trade one of my running backs. I got Jordan Howard super late. I'd like him as well. I'll be able to trade one of these guys for running back or a quarterback at some point. But let's talk about risk players. So look, here's the deal. Hype works both ways, right? We talk about like guys that we liked in terms of sleepers at each position, some value guys in the last couple of weeks. But the reverse side of hype is that when guys like Tyler Higbee is one that we talked about, like he's going super high. I've seen him going in 4th and 5th round. Sorry, it makes me laugh. Sorry if that happened to you, but seeing him going super early in mock drafts, earlier than that value should get there. And what happens is people see this hype and they think, oh, I need to take this guy early to make sure I get him. Which I'm always like, be patient. Just be patient, take the value. But there are guys, like, I kind of like, where some of these positions end up. What do you say we go through just position by position? We go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, and defense, we talked about defense and kicker enough last week, so we won't talk about that again. I got to be honest with you. I'm looking at looking at quarterback average draft position. I like some sleepers, which you've already talked about. I don't have a lot here that I disagree with, but I'll lead in with one that gives me a little bit of pause, and it's Dak Prescott. And it's not because I think, he's a bad quarterback or he won't get stats. My big beef with him being at this point the 3rd drafted quarterback in terms of ADP, the reason I say he's risky is he's inheriting a new offensive system, 1. 2, he's on a contract year essentially. We'll see if he gets franchised again next year. We don't know what's going to happen. So if you're in a dynasty or keeper league, I don't know that he's the guy that you want to stake your claim on for the quarterback of the future because you don't know where he's going to be next year. I would say odds are in favor of him being somewhere else due to financial oddities of the NFL and the quarterback position and franchise tags. No really offseason until we get into the training camps. I don't know, man. He's my big risk just based on how high he is. I would have him below Deshaun. I would have him below Russell Wilson. I'd have him below Kyler Murray. What say you?
Well, you mentioned 2 things, right? You mentioned the coordinator and the contract. I'm going to go ahead and say both of those are positives, right? Because talk about the coordinator or the system, Mike McCarthy coming over. Kellen Moore is still the coordinator,
True.
Right? So that system is basically still in place. And Kellen Moore was a great play caller last year. McCarthy's going to add whatever he has to add to the offense. He's going to spin it a little bit. But for the most part, it's the same system. And then you talk about the contract. I mean, generally when we talk about contract years, that's a motivating factor, if anything. It usually elevates a player's play. And I'm going back to the system here. Mike McCarthy, we talked about this in one of our other episodes. He likes to throw the ball more down around the goal line, whereas opposed to Jason Garrett has had a history just handing the ball off to Ezekiel Elliott. So you look at Prescott last year. He was the number 2 quarterback in points per game. And that was basically getting a chunk of it from the yards and from his rushing. He did have a good amount of touchdowns, but we could see his touchdown total climb even more this year. So I have no problem with Dak Prescott at QB3. I have him there. I have him above Watson, above Kyler, above Russell Wilson.
Sure. Why don't you give me, because when we were talking about quarterback, you smiled like you had a couple on your list that you thought. And since, honestly, at quarterback, I don't really have any beef with these rankings. So why don't you just kind of lead the way on quarterback? Because honestly, I'm just kind of following your lead on this one.
It's funny. You're following my lead, but I don't have a single – I came up with an all-fade list. There's not a single quarterback on it.
Yeah.
Because I think they are being valued properly. I think the quarterbacks who have – the rushing value are being valued high enough. The ones who have the injury risks are being pushed down low enough. Maybe I would say Matthew Stafford in a super flex league I'm avoiding. I love him in a 1 quarterback. I love the upside. I love chasing what he did in 8 games last year.
Yeah, right.
But when it comes to he's at QB 13 right now for ADP in a super flex format, I want my first quarterback and my second quarterback to be someone I can rely on.
Yeah.
I don't want to focus on the points per game too much as opposed to
health,
removing risky players.
Right.
In Stafford, you talk about 2 years in a row it's been a back injury. He didn't miss any games 2 years ago, but he fought through it towards the end. His stats fell off a cliff. It came out at the end of the year that he was playing through, I believe, fractured something in his back.
Yeah.
And then last year again, he started hot but missed the last 8 games to a back injury. So in a super flex format, I think at a QB 13, I can find other quarterbacks who have similarly high upside. Talk about Daniel Jones, Teddy Bridgewater. I'd rather take a chance on those guys who I'm not concerned about as far as the health and risk factor.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I mean, the thing with Stafford, and it's funny because on Get Paid we did a Detroit Lions preview, and we posted on YouTube, and a lot of the people. Detroit, they love them some Stafford. I mean, he's been kind of the franchise there for, long time at this point. They're like, Stafford, he doesn't miss any games, yada, yada. Because I talked to him about my concerns about injury, exactly what you said. And when you're talking about dealing with a fractured back 2 years, that's exactly what ended Tony Romo's career. I mean, Tony Romo's career ended on a slide. You remember that? He slid and then somebody rolled over his back, broke his back. Dak Prescott took over. The rest is history. He got the offer from CBS and moved on. Like Stafford, when you're dealing with like little fractured vertebrae and all that, first of all, that's just a scary thing to talk about, period. But it seems like that's an injury that tends to recur. And that concerns me. I mean, it's a valid concern. I'm going to throw another one out there. Actually, I'm going to throw two out there looking at the list. Although, not to say that he's overvalued at this point, but Cam Newton, I've been saying from the get, is look. I don't know what's going to happen here. Stidham. I don't think Stidham's a better quarterback necessarily, but if he can execute the system better in New England, Stidham will start. Cam Newton will find the field, but it's not a slam dunk that he's going to be the starter all year. Remember they went from Bledsoe, who was on a Hall of Fame type trajectory in his career, to Brady. Due to injury. I mean, anything could happen with New England. The other one, I know you're high on this guy, Aaron Rodgers, who I love as well. I think people.
Whoa, who said I was high on Aaron Rodgers?
I thought you were higher on him. Well, let me say this: I'm not saying that you're high on him, but I think you value him as a possible comeback, swing back quarterback from last year. I could be wrong in that. I thought I was talking to you about that.
I do think that he'll play angry. I wouldn't be surprised if I said that in the past, but I don't think I ever was excited about Aaron Rodgers from a fantasy aspect.
Maybe because on Get Paid, my co-host there is a Packers fan. Maybe I was talking to him.
We did have a conversation about Rodgers, and I remember we were talking about how he plays angry. Everybody in Green Bay says single Aaron Rodgers is better Aaron Rodgers, and the Danica Patrick breakup. So I remember the conversation, but in terms of fantasy, I'm not taking him at it. Yeah. He's QB 11 in ADP right now. I have him closer to down towards QB 15.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, but again, I mean, basically he's backup, and we agree on that, a pretty solid backup or, QB 2 in Superflex or something like that. All right, so let's move it to, let's end the show on running back just because, tease that. We're going to end the show on running back. So let's skip over that position for now, go to wide receiver. Now, one of the lists, when I held up the book, you might have noticed the first name on my list that I held up is DeAndre Hopkins, and I have it written in the book as a risk player. Now, obviously, I think DeAndre Hopkins is a starting receiver, and I'm just talking about value at this point. When the offseason started and the mock drafts and the projections started coming out, I would say in like May, June, right after the NFL draft, people were drafting him as a wide receiver one, as in like the top receiver drafted. I thought that was high, and I feel like people kind of thought like, oh, Arizona's a passing offense. We can just take DeAndre Hopkins, plug him into maybe a better offense and he's going to improve. And I just felt like, there's more mouths to feed in this offense, and it's kind of a spread offense. So I don't know that DeAndre Hopkins is going to get 150 targets. His quality of targets might be better, but I don't know that he'll get the same amount. So that was my thing. But I will say, average draft position, I kind of like where he is at this point. I just didn't think he should have been taken over Michael Thomas at the beginning, and I think the market's kind of come back. But that said, I don't have a ton of wide receiver that I'm hating. I see more value as opposed to being put off at this point by average draft position by some people. So I'll let you lead off. I do have a couple, but I'll let you lead off for now. Who's your kind of risk player at the wide receiver position?
So this guy is my top wide receiver on the all fade list, and I do have a little bit of concern about fading this guy, but honestly, it's just not worth the risk to me, and that's Adam Thielen. And I get the upside with Adam Thielen. I was all in on Adam Thielen last year after he had a great year 2 years ago. I was ready to take Adam Thielen as my wide receiver one. Didn't work out so much last year. They turned into a run-based offense. He dealt with the hamstring injuries. But now with Diggs being gone and Dalvin Cook having his holdout question marks, Adam Thielen's ADP has skyrocketed. He's at wide receiver 13 right now. And to me, that is just way too high when you assess the risk factor. Like, to me, it's just 30-plus-year-old wide receiver, declining, and has had recent soft tissue injuries with the hamstring.
Right.
I don't like investing in those kind of players, especially at a third-round asking price, because you look at the players you're giving up to take Adam Thielen. He's going above DJ Moore, A.J. Brown, Cooper Kupp, who are wide receivers 14, 15, 16, even Calvin Ridley, Tyler Lockett, DJ Chark, DK Metcalf. I would take all of those guys before Adam Thielen, just because Adam Thielen may have maybe a 1 to 2 point per game ceiling higher than those guys, but is that worth the risk? Like, that's not going to win your league by taking Adam Thielen over DJ Moore, Adam Thielen over A.J. Brown. That point per game's difference is not going to win your league. But if you have Adam Thielen have another injury, which would not be surprising after he's had one last year and is now getting up there in age, you could lose your league by spending a third-round pick on Adam Thielen. Yeah. And I feel like just the range of wide receivers he's in, there's just so many guys to fall in love with. Like, why would you fall in love with the 30-plus-year-old who's coming off an injury-prone season?
Yeah, I hear you. I'm going to throw another name out at you. Again, in terms of range, I don't have too much of a problem, but similar to kind of your thing on Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper for me is a guy that when I'm in drafts, when I'm in a live situation and I'm forced to make the pick and I see Amari Cooper at that spot, I find myself moving away from him, because what's kind of ringing in my ears at this point is you got the rookie coming in there who's very talented. And then I feel like this might be the year that Michael Gallup overtakes Cooper as like the stud in that offense. So when you combine those two things, you know, the rook coming in there and you got Michael Gallup on there, I'm not saying Cooper is going to be bad. I still think he gives you consistency and is going to be solid. He's going to give you touchdowns, obviously. But, you know, I look at him, I have Juju Smith-Schuster in terms of ADP, one rung behind him. I like with Roethlisberger coming back, I like Smith-Schuster above him. Beckham is another guy who's underneath Amari Cooper right now. Look, Beckham, we saw what happened last year. If you believe the reports that he was hampered by injury, that's one thing. I've always felt that the play calling in Freddie Kitchens is awful last year. Now that they're going to go more run-based, I think the quality of target is better for Beckham, so I think he's going to swing back. Cooper Kupp, I always think is like perpetually underrated. Basically, I think he's the guy that works the middle of the field for that offense, not Tyler Higbee. Spoiler alert, because I'm going to be talking about Higbee in a couple minutes when we get to tight end. Cooper, I think, is underrated. You got Thielen after him, who we just talked about. There's a lot of guys. DJ Moore is another guy I would have above Amari Cooper at this point. So, you know, I'm not saying he's bad. I'm not trying to throw shade at the guy, but there are just other people at that area that when I'm drafting, I'm not in a mock draft, like I'm picking for my team. I'm like, let me take a pause here. Let me bump him down a round. And, of course, by the time the next round comes back, he's gone.
Yeah, you talk about OBJ. He's going at wide receiver 9 right now, which is before Allen Robinson, before DJ Moore, A.J. Brown. I would take those 3 wide receivers ahead of Odell for sure, just because we're looking at guys who had good years last year. Odell did not have a good year last year. Like, you're banking on projecting something that hasn't happened. Whereas with these other guys, you're just really banking on the exact same thing that happened last year to happen again. And I feel a lot more comfortable with that. As far as wide receivers go for my fade list, I kind of tend to apply the same rationale across the board. And I mentioned it with Adam Thielen. There's 2 kind of check marks that if you check them both, you're just not getting drafted by me. That's one, being over 30 years old. I'm an ageist. Sorry, I can't help it. And 2 is if you were hurt recently within either last year or the year before. If you combine age and a lack of durability, it just ain't worth it to me. And that means T.Y. Hilton at a wide receiver 26 ADP and A.J. Green at a wide receiver 28 ADP. The upside, it's not worth it to me at that point, because again, you look at the range of wide receivers they're going, you have to pass up another wide receiver to take one of these guys.
Right.
Stefan Diggs is going smack dab in the middle of them at wide receiver 27. I'd rather him than either Hilton or AJ Green, just because I trust him to stay healthy at least. And I think the upside, the difference is negligible at best. You mentioned Michael Gallup, Marquise Brown, Tyler Boyd, even CeeDee Lamb. I'd rather CeeDee Lamb than Hilton or AJ Green, just because the risk factor, it's just not worth it to me at that point.
I agree with you. Plus, I was talking about Cooper and Gallup and that dynamic. I think Boyd at this point is the wide receiver one in Cincinnati. Whether or not people agree with me, it's great to have AJ Green back, but I think at this point, AJ Green just helps Tyler Boyd have more one-on-one type matchups downfield. So I think that'll help. You mentioned Stefan Diggs, touched on him. He's on my fade list too. We talked about him on another show, so I won't spend too much time. But I just feel like in this offense, it's gonna be a 2-horse race at the wide receiver. And John Brown being at 50 to 60 picks below him in terms of average draft position. I'd rather hold off on Stefan Diggs, let somebody take him, and bet on John Brown at least being a solid wide receiver too. I think the production there, and I know I'm in the minority, I know a lot of people disagree with me. I think the production there is going to be very similar when we end the season, more similar than people think. And I would say the same was true, again, we've talked about this in prior and sleeper stuff. I think Marvin Jones will be surprisingly close to Kenny Golladay next season as well. Not that I'm fading Golladay by any point. I would have loved to have taken him in my draft. I missed out on him by a pick or two, so I would have absolutely taken him. But if you miss out on him, you can get maybe 90% worth of Galladay's production, 60, 70 picks later, which I like just fine. So Stefan Diggs, I'll disagree with you a little bit on T.Y. Hilton.
Let me talk about Diggs real quick though, before
you
get into Hilton. The reason I'm not fading him is because of his ADP. It's wide receiver 27. He's not even being drafted as a wide receiver 2. He can be taken as your wide receiver 3. And has there been any – I don't have his historical finish. Has there been any time in the past 2-3 years Stefan Diggs has not finished as at least a wide receiver 2? So I think he's being drafted at his floor. I don't love the upside like you say. I think anyone who's going to draft him higher in the ADPs around wide receiver 20, that might be a mistake. But the names going behind him, A.J. Green, Michael Gallup, Landry, Marquise Brown, Boyd, Deebo Samuel, Edelman, Fuller, Marvin Jones, Cooks, John Brown, Slayton, those aren't generally number one wide receivers. Maybe a couple of them, Marquise Brown, Deebo maybe, Cooks. But other than that, he's one of the last wide receiver ones on his team going in fantasy draft. So he's kind of like a last resort option if you're fading wide receiver hard and you just want a guy who's going to lead his team. I think Stefan Diggs at a wide receiver 27 ADP, I think that's definitely palatable for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I'm saying remove him from the list. So we disagree slightly. You mentioned a T.Y. Hilton. I definitely have T.Y. Hilton a rung or two ahead of Stefan Diggs, really for the same reason. Now I know the injury stuff, so I can't argue with that at all. But Phillip Rivers, he was fixated on Keenan Allen for years. Keenan Allen's getting 50 targets a game for San Diego and Los Angeles. In respective years. But T.Y. Hilton, if he can stay on the field again, big if, I would have him ahead. But you mentioned some of the receivers behind Stefan Diggs right now. I'd take Parker over Diggs. I like him in the new offense there. I'd take DJ Chark, certainly both of us would, over him. I would take a run on Gallup or Boyd above. But, I'm splitting hairs here. I'm talking about moving him down 5 or 10 spots in my rankings, not 30 or 40. Again, at this point, the fantasy world, I think, has kind of come back to where I was initially in the season. I think people are a lot higher on Diggs to start the year, but I think he's appropriately there. And you have another name here because, I'm not... I'm going to wide receiver 100. It's hard for me to say one's a fade there.
That was my 3 on the list.
Yeah.
It was the 3 30-plus-year-old guys who are coming off injuries.
Yeah.
Don't want any of them.
All right, so let's move to tight end, and then we'll close out with running back. So tight end, I'm moving through the list here. I'm going to give you one that I think is, to me, kind of around 10 range bottom line starter, but he's going a lot earlier in drafts. And I know we've teased Higbee. I'll talk about him in a second, but let me lead off with Darren Waller. I like Waller, but there were reasons last year that Darren Waller started to excel. First of all, they didn't have a downfield threat, so they had to work the middle of the field. So they had Hunter Renfrow, who was still coming on. Darren Waller was just eating up targets, as well as Tyrell Williams. Well, this year they've added a bunch of pieces to that. Not only that, but they added Greg Olsen at the position. They have the other tight end there, the other rookie, he was a rookie last year. I can never remember his name for some reason. You probably know it offhand. I can never remember the backup guys. But the other guy was getting all the red zone targets. Help me out with the name.
Foster Moreau.
Yeah, Foster Moreau, because there's 2 Foster Moreaus in the league, but he's the only tight end. Foster Moreau eats up red zone targets. I don't think Jason Witten. I don't think Jason Witten is going to be eating up a ton of red zone targets, but he's another guy at tight end, and he blocks well, so he's going to be on the field for that run-based offense. Ruggs down the field. You got Tyrell Williams, who I think is going to be a lot better than people think because of the addition of Ruggs. I think Waller, although he'll catch more touchdowns this year, he just has to. I think the targets and the receptions are going to be down. So I'm not necessarily fading him in like non-PPR leagues, but if you're in a PPR league, I just don't think he's worth the draft capital at this point. Agree or disagree?
Well, first I like him better in PPR leagues, and I'm also not fading Darren Waller. And here's why. You talk about the regression to the receptions and the yards, but then you mentioned as well, he only scored 3 touchdowns last year. So if we see the touchdowns go up 1, 2, 3 touchdowns, it should buffer a little bit of the loss of the receptions and the yardage. And he caught, 90 passes, 1,100 yards last year? Like, he can regress a little bit and still be a 75 reception, 900-yard tight end, which is fantastic if you can get in the 5th, 6th round. And then you talk about the fact that they paid him after he performed. They wanted to retain him. They clearly have plans to keep him as a main function of this offense. They did add some wide receivers this year, which is concerning. But again, 2 of them are rookies. Tyrell Williams already, I believe he separated his shoulder, something that is serious. He had a serious shoulder injury this year that he's going to try and fight through for the rest of the year. So we don't even know if Tyrell Williams ends up on injured reserve at some point.
Sure. I
do like Renfrow, but I don't know if any wide receiver is going to be ready to dominate targets year 1. So I think Darren Waller is still going to finish as Oakland's leading receiver this year.
Interesting. So why don't you give me one on your list, because I only have one more, and I've already talked about him a little bit on this show.
Oh, well, that's who I'm going to talk about, my
Go
friend.
for it. Go for it. Give it to me.
Tyler Higbee. All right, right now in PPR scoring, he's going as tight end 7. That's above Evan Ingram and Hayden Hurst, which just does not make sense to me. We've talked about it before. If you follow me on Twitter, if you want to check out the article I wrote at my site at gurufantasyworld.blogspot.com, I put up a massive thread against Tyler Higbee, and there's just so much evidence against him that it's hard to ignore the multiple factors, right? You talk about the main factor being Gerald Everett coming back. Those last 5 games, they were amazing, right? They were amazing for Tyler Higbee. He out-targeted Johnny Munt 56-5. 56-5 in those 5 games, guys. That's not going to happen this year with the tight end split. Tyler Higbee's not taking 90% of the tight end targets. I hate to break it to you. It just ain't going to happen. No. Gerald Everett's a 4.62 running 2nd-round tight end pick who is progressing in all 3 years. Sean McVay wants to use him. They went and spent the 2nd-round pick on Van Jefferson. They're still going to run plenty of 3 wide receiver sets. To take Tyler Higbee, who's in a split tight end committee, over a guy like Evan Ingram, who really all he needs to do is stay healthy to just be a league winner, or Hayden Hurst, who has the entire tight end room to himself in Atlanta, I think it makes 0 sense, especially when you talk about he's at a 68 overall ADP. You got to take that guy in the 6th round to get him. It makes no sense.
I agree, and I'm just going to give you different reasons why I agree, because I agree with everything you said. Let me throw some more at everybody about Tyler Higbee. We're trying to talk you off the ledge, people. Do not take him as early as he's going. Don't do it. So we talk about other tight ends in schemes. We talk about a lot of offensive scheme on this show. Evan Ingram, new scheme. Jason Garrett calling plays. Well, Jason Garrett will use the tight end, extensively in his offense. Evan Ingram is going to be strong there. Austin Hooper gone from Atlanta. Hayden Hurst comes in there. they throw the ball quite a bit. They're a passing offense. First of all, they pass like 80% of the time. Yes, I know
led
you have
the league last year.
Yeah, they have Julio Jones. Yes, I get it. They have Calvin Ridley. Yes, I get it. I like Russell Gage. I think he's being drafted too low. If you're in a deeper league, like a 14-team league or something like that, take Russell Gage because he'll give you decent value on the bottom of your bench. But look, man, like Hayden Hurst athletically is very strong. He's one of these kind of like really fast guys. He's not a blocker, but that's not what this scheme wants. This scheme wants to throw the ball. He's going to be a mismatch at the tight end position all year. Hayden Hurst should absolutely be ahead of Higbee. Now, Higbee, you mentioned Gerald Everett. In years past, there have been times where Higbee's gone down, for 1, 2, 3 weeks at a time or something like that. And Gerald Everett had a very similar uplift that we saw Tyler Higbee have at the end of last season. This offense likes both of these players. I would argue that when both are healthy, McVay tends to like Gerald Everett a little bit more than Tyler Higbee. So when these two players on the field, I feel like Everett is a little bit more integral, but they also kind of play a little bit of a hot hand approach. And I think whoever has the better week in practice will probably play. Just because Higbee had a great last 5 weeks or whatever it was last year, Everett wasn't on the field, man. He's a good tight end. McVay likes him. That's important. And I'll give you one more schematic-based thing. The Rams could not get the ball, could not run the ball last year. Goff was throwing the ball way too much. And that's not going to be what the system does this year. They will get back to the run. They have, Cam Akers coming in there. I know they're still going to run a committee, probably approach there as well. Higbee's not going to have the quality of the targets. He's not going to have the volume of targets, and he's going to be competing with Gerald Everett, who everybody is just dismissing at this point. It's not reality. And that's way too much risk.
About that too. Yeah,
go for it.
Because you bring up a good point about how it worked the same way with Gerald Everett. Like the main thing that was propelling Tyler Higbee to this production in those last 5 games, it was the snap share. It was the fact that he was on the field. He was running all the routes. He didn't go below 86% of the snaps in any one of those 5 games. He was between 86 and 97% of the snaps, right? You look at the one game he missed last year at the beginning of the year, Gerald Everett played 88% of the snaps in that game. So it's not like, they just fell in love with Tyler Higbee. When one of these guys get hurt, they relied on the other guy. Now Gerald Everett, he's not hurt. It's going to go back to being a close, maybe it's a 60-40 split to Tyler Higbee, but it's going to be a split. It's not going to be a 56-5 target split like it was with Tyler Higbee and Johnny Mundt in the last 5 games.
Yeah, I mean I truly don't understand the hype. And then I've talked to people that think that Higbee is going to be working the middle of the field and Cooper. That's why people are fading Cooper Kupp. I'm just like, guys, I mean,
Cooper Kupp's had multiple good seasons, being Jared Cook's number 1 option.
Right.
We have over 30 games of Cooper Kupp producing with Jared Cook. We have 5 games of Tyler Higbee, and Cooper Kupp was probably hurt. You look at last year, those last 5 games, I believe it was against Pittsburgh. He only played like 30% of the snaps. So that was clearly injury-based. He wouldn't have played under 50% of the snaps if he wasn't hurt. So there was something going on with Cooper Kupp in those last 5 games. It's, again, part of the factor of why Tyler Higbee did what he did. But to just assume it's going to continue like that into this year is just not something I'm on board with.
You're talking about like red zone offense. So we've seen in recent years. I know Brandon Cooks is gone, but they're going to run 3 wide receiver sets. Robert Woods and historically Cooks, but somebody else this year. They get a lot of the over the top threat, things, but this team wants to run the ball in between the 20s. And when they get in there, they'll still run on the goal line if they can get in. I mean, even Gurley, I think he had double-digit touchdowns last year, if I'm not mistaken, in his quote-unquote bad year. So this team will run on the goal line. But if you look at this red zone offense, they throw the ball to their slot receiver. And this isn't a new thing. McVay did the same thing in Washington when he was the coordinator there. They will throw the ball to their slot receiver. And Kupp, when he's healthy, scores a touchdown like every other game. Historically.
And this is not just one season.
Yeah.
This is multiple times. He's been a touchdown maker since he's came into the league.
Yeah, the one who owns the middle of this field strategically for the Rams is Kupp. And I like the tight ends, but I only like the tight end if one of the others hurt. And I'm telling you, they're interchangeable for me. If Higbee goes down, I like Everett, and I would pick him up off of waivers, but I wouldn't put him on my team in draft-wise. And really, that's it for me at tight end. I don't mind anybody else. I see more value there than I see, I don't like this guy here. I can't really make a strong argument against anybody else. How about you?
Yeah, I feel the same way. Maybe Kyle Rudolph at tight end 16. I just feel like there's higher upside options out there. Dallas Goedert, Jonnu Smith, even Blake Jarwin I would take. Chris Herndon especially I would take before Kyle Rudolph. I don't think there's really a whole lot of justification for putting Kyle Rudolph at tight end 16.
Yeah, if Herndon can stay healthy, that Jets tight end is going to have value. I mean, we saw Ryan Griffin lead the league at tight end in fantasy points like 2 or 3 weeks out of the last 8, maybe 2. It was definitely that. But when we do the fantasy football fallout, the players that kick you in the nuts and all that, or the hey, I'm watching you, the spotlight, the Eye of Sauron is what I use for that. But when we start doing this these segments, after week 1, which I'm going to love doing, you see some really interesting thing, like Fitzpatrick led quarterbacks, and Tannehill led quarterbacks, like both of them, like 2 out of the last maybe 10 weeks.
Oh, he led me to a champion. I wouldn't say led. Lamar might have had something to do with
sure.
that. But Ryan Fitzpatrick helped me win championship last year.
I mean, you can find value, but Jets tight end is one you got to keep your eye on. You really do, because Darnold likes throwing to his tight end. That's important when quarterbacks always have that, like when you have 2 players and you're scrambling out of the pocket, like who do you look for? And the Rams, I would argue that's Cooper Kupp. Jared Goff, when he's under pressure and he's throwing, he's looking for Cooper Kupp because he's going to make a play to him. Darnold likes to do that with tight end, so you need to pay attention to that stuff as well. Let's switch it over to running back. I've led the different positions. Why don't you hit me with your first running back on your fade list at this point?
So as a guy, you briefly mentioned his name at the beginning of the show. I believe you've compared Chris Thompson to him, and that's Dalvin Cook. And for me, it's about the first 2 rounds. There's not a whole lot of ceiling upside to be chasing. Like, these guys are scoring basically about the same amount of points. You talk about Dalvin Cook, he's played in 28 out of 48 games so far. That's about 9 per season, and he's going above running backs like Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon. These guys have played 14 games every single season. And you look at last year, especially Derrick Henry. This is the one I do not believe in any league, even a PPR format, that Dalvin Cook should be going before Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry last year with Ryan Tannehill, he averaged 21.1 points per game in a PPR format. Dalvin Cook last year, 20.9. Derrick Henry was a better running back for fantasy for you last year with Ryan Tannehill than Dalvin Cook was. And then you throw in the durability factor. Why are you chasing Dalvin Cook and taking on the risk of a player who's averaged 9 games per season and is playing 28 out of 48 games so far, so you can pass up Derrick Henry, who's basically just a behemoth of what I don't even know if can even be called a human being. Like, this guy is a monster. I'm not betting on Derrick Henry to get hurt, not after he's played 62 out of 64 games. And I'm not betting on him regressing significantly, especially when he should be just as good as last year rushing and could possibly even see increased receiving volume. If I'm at 5th overall, 6th overall, 7th overall, I'm fading Dalvin Cook probably to the end of the first round, maybe into round 2, just because I want stability. I don't want to have to take on a guy who I'm not comfortable with in round 1, a guy who I feel like I have to reach on his handcuff probably in round 7 or 8, and then spend 2 picks on one guy. I don't like it. If Dalvin Cook plays all 16 games this year, goes off, goes crazy, great. I lost a 1 to 2 point per game advantage by going with Derrick Henry. Big whoop. I can still win my league.
Right. No arguments there. And it's funny because Derrick Henry started the offseason. I remember seeing this and being shocked. Derrick Henry started the offseason as a 2nd-round running back. Like, if you have your drafts in May and June, which that's rare, but some people do it, you could have had Derrick Henry in the 2nd round. Now, average draft position, according to Fantasy Pros, I know you're looking at something I think might be using a different source. But
no, I'm using Fantasy
Pros.
Oh,
you are? Okay. So I have him at running back 4 at this point. So he's kind of vaulted up the charts, and I think he should because I think for all those reasons. I mean, he gets volume. I don't think the end of last season was a fluke. But speaking about Dalvin Cook, so I'm not a guy that wants to go skydiving, right? I don't want to jump I don't want to jump out of a plane. And I don't want to. Yeah, good for you, man.
Not in fantasy.
Not in fantasy, but you like skydiving. Great for you. I'm not built that way. I'm just a guy that wants to stay on the plane. I don't care if I'm with an instructor. I don't do it. What's that thing where you jump out of a plane and you have like a fly suit and you like jump off? It's like you base dive, your base jump, and then you fly. What's that version of skydiving? I can't remember what it's called.
The name of it.
Well, whatever it is.
It's like a wingsuit.
It's a wingsuit. So you got skydiving, which is, fairly safe, but I don't want to do it. Then you have whatever that thing is, and that's what Dalvin Cook is to me. Now here's the thing: when I put out the almanac, and I calibrate, the offense and Kubiak, I think Dalvin Cook in that system, if he can stay healthy, biggest if in the world. It's just going to be a home run. And the projections came back, and I think I actually had Dalvin Cook in terms of projections, and I'm talking about if these are avatars, not taking health into account. Dalvin Cook, I think, was projected to come back as the number one running back. But then you have risk, like you were saying before. And when do you take him? I would take Dalvin Cook. I would take the risk, but you were absolutely right. The risk is astronomical, and I can't argue about steering clear of that. I'm personally not fading him too much, but, man, it is wingsuit skydiving. It's dangerous. So
while we're talking about those first round running backs, there's just a couple of them that I'm tending to just kind of pass on. Mm-hmm. Dalvin Cook. Talk about Josh Jacobs. I really like Josh Jacobs. I wanted my Ravens to draft him so bad last year. I just can't get on board with that shoulder and then the questions about the receiving role. I want security. Give me Nick Chubb, who I'm not even that high on. I'd rather him than Josh Jacobs just because I feel like he'll stay healthy. Kenyon Drake, who it kills me to say this just because I was so high on him this year, with him being in a walking boot.
Yep.
It could be nothing. Miles Sanders, too. It could be nothing, but, man, it just gives me pause taking those guys in the first round. I think kind of the guys who are going up my board now, Derrick Henry, Mixon, CEH, Chubb, even Aaron Jones is kind of sliding up my board, Eckler specifically, just because I'd rather a guy who doesn't give me health concerns. So if I'm missing on those stable running backs in round 2, I think I'd rather just take a top tight end.
Yeah, no argument. And you mentioned Edwards-Helaire, CEH. So it's funny, after the draft came out, I put out my first version of the book, and I think I had Edwards-Helaire at that point overranked, which was around like 10 or 11 at running back, maybe, somewhere in that bottom of the first round kind of area. And I think he initially kind of debuted in the rankings around like 20 to 25, overall. I'm not talking about running backs, like overall. And eventually he slungshot past. So like readers will come in and like future versions of the draft. I haven't moved Edwards-Helaire since he's come out. And my thing is, like, when I watched...
Even with the Damian Williams news?
Even with that, I never moved him because I started watching college tape at that point. And I'm not saying I'm fading him because I kept him consistent, but the reason I'm not moving him up into my top 8, like he's kind of inching up in a lot of drafts. And in my Dynasty League, I think he went like 4th overall in the year 1 draft. So... like, that's not to say, like, he was the top rookie taken. Like, he was actually the 4th overall running back selected. So, like I get the value. I get Andy Reid. I remember Brian Westbrook very well for the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm sure that's the vision. But when I watch college tape and I see linebackers and defensive ends seriously, like, being able to run him down in an open field, this is the NFL, man. Like, you're going to have a defensive tackle. Like, think about this, because this will happen. He's going to break through. He's going to have an open field, and a defensive tackle is going to chase him down 10 yards down the field. It's just not what we're used to seeing. He has great hands. He can pick up the blitz. He's going to have value. But I'm not moving him up into my top 8 when I don't know what's happening there. On top of that, I'm starting to see, because of course we can't watch the games, and that's the big thing. We need to watch preseason games to vet all this stuff, right? I look at the news, and I hear like Mahomes or somebody say like, oh yeah, when he's in there, he's doing well. Well, why isn't he in there all the time? Like, that's a weird, and I know I could be reading a lot into that, but when I see that, I'm just like, what are they going to do? Are they going to throw DeAndre Washington in here in a weird kind of split? Is Tyrell Williams, who we talked about, is he going to be getting red zone carries? It's just a little bit too much risk for me. I know the upside. I'm not arguing with the upside, but I just feel like the signs are pointing towards Edwards-Helaire needs an offseason to go to speed camp and knock a 10th or 2 off of his 40 time. Before I feel comfortable with it. Like, if I saw him in action, it's one thing, but not seeing him in action, I just feel he's a little risky to take if at like the number 8 pick. I'd wait for him on the swing back personally.
Let me tell you why I'm on the other side of that, all right? Because Kaide Edwards, I don't think he needs to have substantial rushing volume. He doesn't need breakaway runs to be a top fantasy back. Like, where this guy gets value, it's going to be catching the ball, getting 50-plus receptions, which I think he can easily do.
I agree.
And it's going to be scoring touchdowns, right? I feel like Edwards-Helaire, he's going to have to go out of his way to underperform this year. Like, he's going to have to really do something to muck this up, because if you're in the starting running back in a Patrick Mahomes offense who can catch the ball, he's going to catch 50 receptions. He's going to score 10-plus touchdowns almost just by default by being on the field. So you bring up the speed, the breakaway speed. Kareem Hunt ran a 4.62. He seemed to do just fine in this offense. I don't think it's something that I'm going to write him off for. Do I think it does limit his rushing potential? Yes, but I think those touchdowns are going to be really all that he needs to happen to reach that upper RB1 territory.
So let me talk a little bit about speed, because that's a great point that you brought up, 4.62. And I think Jerry Rice famously ran a 4.6. You see him catch the ball and run away, from people over the years, and he's the GOAT at the wide receiver position. When I see speed, I'm not worried about 40 time. I'm not telling you this, David. I'm telling the people that are listening in. I'm not worried about 40 time. If I see a guy run a 5 flat 40, I don't care about that. I want to know what they run in pads. And so, like, the draft stuff, the slow 40, I've seen plenty of running backs have a slow 40. I personally write that off. I want to see what you look like on film. And so when I say, like, when I'm watching college tape, when he's in pads and running, does he look slow? Yeah, he looks slow. Whereas a Kareem Hunt, when you put him in pads, he doesn't look slow to me. And so that's what gives me pause. It's not the time itself. It's are you running? Does it look like you're running in on a sandy beach when everybody's on a track surface when you have pads on? And when I see that gives me enough of a red flag to not draft him. Like I said, in my top 8, I'm not fading him. I'm not removing him from my draft board, but we're talking about very nuanced picks up there and evading risk. And I just said I'm already in the wingsuit with Dalvin Cook. Edwards-Helaire, I would have Josh Jacobs a little bit ahead of Edwards-Helaire. And we're talking about one spot of average draft position.
Let me talk about that real quick, too, because you talk about the 40 speed and the film. One thing that popped out to me on film, you're right, he doesn't look fast, but he is quick. This guy is quick, and you can see that on film. Turn on the game against Alabama. Look at those spin moves. Look at those spin moves, man. Like, this guy is quick. He can, you know what they say? He can make a guy miss in a phone booth, and he really can. And I think when you apply that to the passing game, running routes, he can. This guy can spin.
Look at those spin moves.
Nailing that circle button, just circle, like all over Alabama. He's quick as a cat. All right.
Yeah.
So put a little respect on Edwards-Helaire.
Hey, man, like I said, I had him at 10. I haven't moved him from that. It might even be, depending on format, it might be a little bit different. And I'll give him a little bit of respect, since, just to let you know I'm not all negative about what I'm really impressed by, because he's not a big guy in terms of stature. What I'm really impressed by is how tough he runs in the middle of the pile. Like, you talk about Andy Reid, you talk about Mahomes, this is a passing offense, you talk about the receptions. And I'm not going to give it to him yet, but I will say this. I would rather have, if I had to pick between DeAndre Washington and CEH on a 4th and goal from the 1 situation, run the ball up the middle, CEH going away. Like, this dude will run through the pile. He can get you a yard, and that's a big deal. Now,
you talk about the low center of gravity, too. One comparison that I loved, Elvin Ryan made this on Twitter, Maurice Jones-Drew.
Yeah, sure.
Small, but he is thick, man. Yeah. Like, you do not want to take that guy on when he's got his shoulder lowered.
Yep.
Not one bit.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, I'm not negative. There are just a couple of guys, like maybe 1 or 2, that I would take above him. I think 4 is a little bit too high. 8 for me is still maybe 2 picks too high. But if I had ended up with him in my dynasty league, I wouldn't be crying about it. I really probably. Yeah, we talked about Fernett. Obviously, he's gone, so we probably don't even need to talk about that anymore. How about Todd Gurley is the next name on my list at running back?
He's on mine, too.
Okay, so when he signed in Atlanta, I read an ESPN article. I don't know who wrote it. They were projecting 21 touchdowns for him. 20, like legit. Like I had to double check 21 touchdowns. This is total. I think it was like 15 rushing and 6 receiving or something like that. It was that kind of breakdown, like Aaron Jones type numbers from last year. And I'm just like, what are you thinking, guys? I mean, this is an offense that historically, I mean, you could date back to the first run of the offense and the coordinators there. Forgive me, I can't remember his freaking Dirk Cutter. Thank you. So Dirk Cutter, his first stint with Atlanta, then his time in Tampa Bay, he just doesn't use running backs, man. He just doesn't. And Todd Gurley's coming from a running back centric system that tries to run the ball inside the 5-yard line to a wide receiver in passing situation. Hayden Hurst is going to outscore Todd Gurley this year. I have no problem throwing that projection down, as well as Julio Jones, as well as Calvin Ridley, in my opinion. He's an afterthought in this offense. He can get you a tough yard, and I think that's going to be his role in this offense. Yeah, he's going to be running back one there. But, hey, Devontae Freeman wasn't anything special in this offense either. I mean, you got to look at the system. I'm fading him for a couple of rounds. I mean, I'm talking about, like, I have him, like, 30 picks, like, later in terms of my overall rankings. What do you think?
I think you make a ton of great points, and I'm fading Todd Gurley as well, especially in round 3. What it reminds me of is the Steven Jackson signing.
Yes. Yep.
Probably 5-6 years ago
in Atlanta with Dirk Cutter,
and not just in Atlanta, coming from the Rams.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
There are parallels all over the place with this, right? And I looked into some of the ADP. Steven Jackson, he went at 211 in my home redraft league, a 12-team league. So he was going in basically late second round, early third round, kind of about where Todd Gurley's going. So when Steven Jackson went to the Rams, he was coming off a year in which he rushed for 258 carries, 1,045 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and caught 38 receptions for 321 yards. That's a very similar split to what Todd Gurley is coming off, right? And the hope was, with little competition in the Atlanta backfield, there's no one behind Jackson on that depth chart, that he would be able to recreate that 3-down production we'd seen in previous years, where he had lines like 43 receptions, 320 yards, where maybe the year he had 90 for 806, 3 touchdowns, or the year he had 51 for 322. We just thought, because no running backs, he's going to get those 3rd-down targets.
Yeah.
And we overlooked the fact that he was trending down, the fact that he had recent injuries, just like Todd Gurley, the fact that the team had wide receivers and tight ends. Then it was Roddy White, a young Julio, and Tony Gonzalez. Now it's an old Julio, Calvin Ridley, and a young Hayden Hurst. So they have, again, 2 wide receivers and a tight end to steal those targets. And then you look at the fact, what did Jackson end up doing? He ended up playing 12 games, and we overlooked the fact that he had a bunch of mileage, 1,265 carries on his tires. Gurley's got 5 straight years of 223-plus carries. Jackson broke down. There's a chance Gurley could break down. And you talk about, even in the 12 games that Steven Jackson played, he caught, let me see what it is, like 33 reception for 191 yards in 12 games. That's not a whole lot of value in the receiving game. So I think the same concerns are there with Todd Gurley. He could break down. They don't rush the ball a lot. They don't pass the ball to the running back a lot historically. And at a 3rd-round ADP, I'd rather just pass on Gurley, take one of those top tight ends, Mark Andrews, Zach Ertz, and just take a guy like Raheem Mostert 3 rounds later, who is, again, same kind of situation. You're hoping for 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns, not a huge receiving role. I'd rather Mostert in round 5 with a top tight end in round 3 than Gurley in round 3 and picking from Tyler Higbee in round 5 and 6.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's just an easy decision for me to fade. And I have it go through basically that whole area. I'm fading Todd Gurley. I'm fading Chris Carson. I'm fading David Johnson in that round 3-4 territory, just because that risk factor. Like it doesn't make sense passing on the tight ends there.
Yeah, I agree. And in basically all of my mock drafts and all of my draft preparation, I can tell you round 7, 8, and 9, I'm pretty much going Mostert in round 7, Marvin Jones around 8, Jordan Howard around 9. And I think all 3 of those are going to be flex-worthy, start-worthy players when all is said and done. So I know I can get value later. So taking a risk on Gurley, like you said, you can go with a tight end, or you can kind of go on that. Mahomes and Jackson will probably be gone by then, based on average draft position these days and mock drafts. But you can get on that swing, whether it's Dak Prescott or Russell Wilson or Kyler Murray, whoever you like, Deshaun Watson. You can get those guys and know that you're going to be able to get 2 running backs and a wide receiver that will make your roster. More often than not, in my opinion, later. So, yeah, I'm with you, man. Gurley's a fade. I'm looking down the list. I'm never super high on David Montgomery, but where he's being drafted, I don't have a super problem with that. Oh,
he just had the injury as well, too, David Montgomery.
Oh, I missed on that. What happened to him?
He had what might be severe. I believe they gave him a 4-week timeline, so he's probably not going to be.
What is that, like an MCL? Is it a knee? Or is
it was his groin. It was a groin strain. He slipped on a wet practice field, and now his week 1 status is in doubt.
Dude, groin injuries are.
I know. He was already tough. He was tough to buy into as well to begin with. So yeah. I think you got to put David Montgomery on the fade list at this point.
I'll give you another one who's kind of catching some steam. I've seen the offseason hype. I've seen what he's done in the weight room. Ronald Jones, for me, is a hard pass. And in years past, I think we've had this discussion before. Like Chris Carson, I know there are some question marks this year, but the Chris Carson versus Rashad Penny debate in 2 years, the last 2 seasons prior to this, I was never high on Penny, and I got laughed out of draft rooms when I would draft Chris Carson over Penny, even as recent as last year. I think the same is true with Ronald Jones this year, in that here's my philosophy. If you're in the same offensive system, and yeah, I know the Brady factor and all that, but you're in the same offense in Tampa Bay. Bruce Arians, you get drafted in the 2nd round. You have every opportunity to get a starting job and to run with that job. Bruce Arians, he wants that David Johnson type. Let me just play you 3 downs and kind of get you a ton of targets and rushes and all that. That's what they wanted Ronald Jones to be. You didn't get it his rookie year. You didn't get it his 2nd year. Even when he was named the starting running back, he was still splitting snaps with Peyton Barber. Peyton Barber, okay? He couldn't leave Peyton Barber in the dust. I just don't think he's going to take the reins and run with it. I know he's got his hat on. I know he's put on weight. You get Brady in there. Maybe he'll get more red zone opportunities because he won't throw so many interceptions. I understand the arguments. I don't think it's a big risk to take him where he's being drafted at this point, but I would be a buyer on Vaughn, the rookie there, before I'd be a buyer on Ronald Jones, just based on what I've seen in the past. I'm not convinced Ronald Jones is ever going to be a starting running back.
That's fair. I'm out on the entire Tampa Bay backfield.
Me too.
I don't mind. Yeah. I don't mind Ronald Jones at RB30 according to Fantasy Pros ADP, but I think, like you mentioned recently, you're seeing him go a lot higher than RB30. I've seen this guy go in the 5th round. I had a friend take him in the late 4th round.
Oh my goodness!
I'm looking at his draft. I'm trying to. It doesn't show the rounds. I'm like, okay, so you went this guy in the 3rd. Who was your 4th? Was it?
Yeah, right.
Was it Amari Cooper? No, I took Cooper in the 5th. I went Rojo in the 4th. My friends, that is not a good idea, all right? Because in the 4th round, you need a guy who's going to catch passes. And Ronald Jones, we don't know that at this point. The news out of camp, all I've heard, Ronald Jones dropping passes. And you mentioned Keyshawn Vaughn. I'm not buying into Keyshawn Vaughn at all. I don't think he's anything special athletically.
He's not. He hasn't.
He didn't have good testing numbers.
I was talking about CEH and watching his college film. Keyshawn Vaughn is a guy that I was hoping to see some more explosion from and be impressed by on film. He didn't really jump out to me either. I'm a seller too, because I think what will end up happening is they're just going to be a 3-headed running back committee.
And Rojo will have his good weeks. He will have his good weeks, but he had his good weeks last year. How often was he on your bench for those good weeks?
Yeah.
It was a guessing game. Like, he's going to have to improve significantly in the receiving area for it to go beyond a guessing game. Like, it's just tough to rely on him.
His ADP, you're talking about recent ADP, he is going a lot higher than this, but like he's jumped ahead of Jordan Howard in ADP. In terms of Fantasy Pros, I just talked about Jordan Howard. You look at Jordan Howard, you feel like must be like 29 or 31 or something like that. He's 25, league age 25. So it's not like Jordan Howard has some juice. He had like his best year is probably his rookie year, but he's going to have value in this offense. I know they have Breed. I think Breed will have some surprising value as a PPR kind of option there as well. But they're just people I like a lot more than Jones, man, especially where he's being drafted now. And then I don't really have anybody else on my running back list that I'm super fading. Anybody left on your list that we haven't talked about?
I got a couple left. This is the end of my list is the running back. So I talked about Chris Carson, right? I mentioned him. It's just read the tea leaves. Team drafted DJ Dallas round 4. Went out, signed Carlos Hyde. It could be just about Rashad Penny. I doubt it. You don't get 2 running backs in because you're worried about your backup running back, all right? They're worried about Carson's health, and justifiably so. I've mentioned this probably about 20 times on the podcast so far. He hasn't played a full year since his senior year of high school. How many times do I got to say that? Stop drafting guys who haven't played full year since their senior year of high school. It's way too much risk in the 4th round to be passing up other legitimate options for guys who could and likely will burn you. Then you talk about okay.
Let me jump in on Carson real quick. So DJ Dallas, I think he's basically going to take over for Rashad Penny. I think that's it. I think he'll be on the field. The Carlos Hyde thing to me is the more, I would say, concerning storyline this offseason for Chris Carson. And I'm sure I wrote this in the book, but my big thing with Carson, I like his explosion, his ability to move the pile. And I think Seattle does too. I think the coaching staff likes him, but I think what drives them freaking crazy is, I mean, they'll be running out the clock. They'll be up 6 points, and there's going to be a minute left in the game, and it's going to be a 2nd and 1, and Carson will get 5 yards and then spin out and then fumble. And he doesn't just fumble. He fumbles in the most critical moments, and that will make you lose a job at the running back position faster than anything else, in my opinion. If you fumble, especially in key situations, even if you get the ball back, even if your offensive lineman jumps on that, you're just begging to give snaps away to somebody else. In New England, if you fumble, you might not get another snap for like 6 weeks. You have to wait for everybody else who just left you on the depth chart to fumble again before you get snaps. And Seattle is, if Carson gets in there, I think he's going to start the season as a starter. I do. But if he fumbles in week 1, week 2, Carlos Hyde comes in there, holds onto the ball, gives him some juice. I mean, that could be it for him. It really could.
Yeah. And I got one more running back in that range and then 2 more after. I got David Johnson, who I mentioned. He's soon to be 29 years old.
Yep.
He's averaged 3.7 yards per carry or less in 3 straight years, 1.8 yards after contact or less in 3 straight years. So he's been not a good runner, right? And then you look at the fit in Houston. Everybody's projecting this workhorse role, and that's the selling point in round 4. But even if he gets this heavy rushing volume that Carlos Hyde got last year, I believe was around 250 carries, he's not been efficient with his carries at all in any of the last 3 seasons. So he's not going to provide a ton of – Carlos Hyde didn't provide a ton of value with his legs last year. He was borderline rosterable despite having 250 carries. And then we're just assuming, because of David Johnson's pass, he's going to come in and push Duke Johnson right out of the way. Duke Johnson exists.
Right.
We don't know what kind of target total David Johnson's going to get. And there's a strong possibility, and this is not my words. This is Ron Stewart, who you might want to follow on Twitter. He's a good follow. He put up a thread on David Johnson. David Johnson is in the wrong role. He's in the Carlos Hyde role. He should be in the Duke Johnson role. They don't have the proper fit here. And it looks very much so like they're going to be asking David Johnson to do the things he's not good at. And it looks very much like it's quite possible that the things he is somewhat good at he's going to have to split with Duke Johnson. So at a round 4 asking price, 29 years old, with the durability issues, inefficiency, a second back on the roster who could steal targets, easy pass for me. Easy pass. I'm not having David Johnson in a single one of my leagues.
I have others in the area above David Johnson. I'm not as strong as a fade as you are. I actually ended up with him in my dynasty draft because he dropped far. No arguments with what you said about Hyde and Duke Johnson. The big question is whether or not he's going to be able to out-target Duke Johnson. If he can be a 3-down back, which is as projected right now, I do think that he'll have value at where he's being picked, and that's kind of what I'm banking on. But there is risk there, and the reality is even in his big years in Arizona, his yards per carry was not impressive. It was all volume-based in that system, right? So, will he get touchdowns? I think he will. The big thing for me is that, DeAndre Hopkins vacating 150 whatever targets that he had last year. Some of those will go to running back. Is it going to be Duke Johnson? I think that's a valid concern. At this point, where he's being drafted, and you can get him, 5th, 6th round at this point, I think he's worth the flyer there, depending on kind of what you already have on the bench.
Let me just ask you this one more thing with David Johnson,
sure.
because the main selling point, right, is that they traded for him and that they traded DeAndre Hopkins for him, so they are going to feel like they need to justify that trade by using him. How long is that going to last? Do we know today, in today's world, that David Johnson's a better running back than Duke Johnson? Do we know that? Do we know he's a better receiving running back than Duke Johnson? I don't know that we know that. And I don't know if they're going to go the whole season just trying to justify a trade playing the worst player in receiving, even in just receiving situations, even if he's a better runner than Duke. I don't know that they're going to continue to just force feed him the ball and look away from Duke just to try and justify that.
You know, and another note on that too is people say, the trade and all that stuff. Houston really traded for the draft pick, I think, more so than they traded for Duke Johnson. Now, did they get enough value back for DeAndre Hopkins? Hell no. I think that was an awful trade. I tweeted as much and talked about it as much. But Duke Johnson, I'm not saying he's an afterthought because I do think that there's value there. But to your point, I don't think that they'll feel the pressure to play Duke Johnson because they traded DeAndre Hopkins for Duke Johnson. I don't see that. I think that
David Johnson.
Did I say Duke? Yeah, David. Yeah. Sorry, the wrong D Johnson.
Slip.
Oh yeah. So what are they going to do on the jersey? Is one going to be D.A. Johnson and the other one's going to be D.U. Johnson?
It better.
D.U. Johnson. Anyway, yeah, the jersey situation is going to be messed up. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see. But who are your other running backs there?
I got two more to kind of finish up real quick. And this one hurts. Really, 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 really hurts to say Mark Ingram. Guys, he's being way, way, way overvalued.
There you go. There's the name there in the book there. Mark Ingram.
You're drafting him way too high. He had 202 carries and 26 receptions last year in 15 games. Only 202 carries and 26 receptions. He was buoyed by 15 touchdowns. He had 5 receiving touchdowns on 26 receptions, guys. That's not going to happen again. You throw in J.K. Dobbins, who they invested in heavily in the draft, in improving Gus Edwards, a healthy Hollywood, Devin Duvernay. Mark Ingram's going to be lucky to hit 20 receptions this year. He's going to be lucky to hit 8 touchdowns. The yardage ceiling is not high. I mean, he's going to be a touchdown-dependent flex who's not going to give you much if he's not in the end zone. And right now you're paying a 5th or 6th round price for that. That's just – it's not worth it. Unless J.K. Dobbins gets hurt, you're going to get burned spending a pick in that range on Mark Ingram this year.
Yeah, mark my words, J.K. Dobbins will be the absolute monster in that backfield by week 8, if not before that. If he's not already to start the season. I agree with you. Ingram is a risk. Now, I think he'll have some value, but not where he's being drafted. Let me throw another one quickly at you because I just remembered. I've seen some press saying Marlon Mack, like Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis is...
The words out my mouth.
My mouth. Yeah, it was that your other one, Jonathan Taylor?
No.
What was yours?
Oh, God, we're on the other side.
We're on the opposite side. So let me just say this.
Mack.
Marlon Mack, I've seen him go late. Here's the thing, like Jonathan Taylor... The press, what's his face? Frank Reich's saying that, Taylor's having trouble overtaking Mack. I don't know for where because Taylor's going at the bottom of the second. In my league, I think he went at the top of the second round. If you're in a dynasty league, I don't have beef with that, but you can find. Look, I mean, Frank Reich historically has gone to that 3 running back thing when he's had to. Marlon Mack, I'm not saying I like him. I'm saying it's more like Tampa where I'm kind of avoiding the backfield until I see. I like Jonathan Taylor, dude. I think he's got a lot of talent. What I'm concerned with is I don't know that he's going to overtake in that job as fast as J.K. Dobbins is going to overtake things in Baltimore. I think those 2 running backs, I would swap them in my league. I would move Jonathan Taylor down a little bit, move J.K. Dobbins up. Again, I know I'm disagreed with there. But Marlon Mack, to hear press that he could start the season as a starter, I don't know, man. That it's too murky for me. And I don't think Nyheim Hines is I think he's going to have some value as a pass receiving running back as well. I'm staying away until I have more information. And Taylor's being, for me, drafted too early. I think that's too much risk at that pick where he's going.
See, I won't disagree with anything you said with Taylor because those concerns are 100% legit. And especially in a PPR format, I think the risk is a lot more palatable in a half PPR where you're kind of just more relying on Taylor to be that elite rusher and to just be a top NFL rusher his first year. But Marlon Mack on the other side, man, like you talk about Nyheim Hines, he's going to be that third down guy. And Marlon Mack, even if he's splitting carries with Jonathan Taylor, like we're talking about what? This team's going to run the ball at most 400 times. You give JT 15 carries a game. You can read any way you want about the coach speak because I've heard just as much things about Jonathan Taylor running over safeties as I have about Marlon Mack playing well. So you can read it in either way. I think at the end of the day, Marlon Mack is severely outclassed by Jonathan Taylor. If he can get a 60-40 split on the carries this year, I'd say Marlon Mack would be lucky. And to give him 40% of the carries at 400 carries, I mean, that's, 160 carry ceiling? And that's if he hits the ceiling. He's much more likely to land in that 125 to 140 carry range. And when you talk about his receptions, man, his receptions have been decreasing, I think, 3 years straight.
Yep.
Let me talk about some of his games last year. In the past 2 years, he's been completely touchdown dependent as a fantasy option. In 2018, he played 12 games. 9 of them, he scored 10-plus fantasy points. But only 2 of those 9 times was it without a touchdown. He needed a touchdown the 7 other times to get to 10-plus fantasy points. Talk about last year. He played in 14 games. He had 7 of those games with 10-plus fantasy points. That's about half his games, exactly half his games, with double-digit points. He reached double-digit points in those 7 games 1 time without a touchdown. 1 time without a touchdown. That's 3 out of 16 games in the past 2 years with 10-plus fantasy points without a touchdown. 3 out of 16 games he is able to do it without a touchdown. He had 8 touchdowns last year. You talk about Jonathan Taylor. That total's probably getting split in half, right? You talk about he needs a touchdown to score double-digit fantasy points.
Yeah.
That's 4 games on the year where he's going to get you double-digit fantasy points if we assume he needs the touchdown to get there. 4 games. Do you know where any of those 4 games are going to be coming?
Yeah,
he's in handcuff territory to me right now.
Yep.
He's not anything more than a guy who you stash on the bench and hope the starter gets hurt because Nyheim Hines, he's going to have that receiving role. Marlon Mack almost certainly is not going to be that third down back, and I just don't see the yardage volume. I don't see the touchdown upside to be drafting this guy anywhere before one of your last few picks.
Yeah, I agree with that. And in terms of Indianapolis, I think the safest running back to take in terms of average draft position is Nyheim Hines because in a lot of leagues you're going to be able to get him for free. Just put him on your watch list at this point and make sure that he gets some targets in week 1. Pick him up. You know what? I just looked at the clock, David.
Yeah,
we're talking for an hour and 17. That should have been.
We love our running backs.
Yeah, I know. It's
got into it a little bit.
We should have split that into 2 episodes. But hey, next week we're talking. We're talking season next season, which is fantastic. Or next week, I mean. So we'll get on that. We'll end the podcast there. We probably went about a half hour too long, but so it goes, man. We're passionate about our fantasy football. That's the way it is on the show. Everybody, please like, subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us if you've hung with us for this long, because it's a long time. Like, subscribe, comment. We would appreciate that. We'll catch you next week, and we'll be talking projections, who to start, surprising starts, all that stuff. Maybe some daily fantasy sneaky plays, all that kind of stuff next week. So make sure you tune in. Catch you next time.